Colorado is so dry, we could be in terrible fire trouble even without human stupidity in the mix. But it is the one thing we can control. We can't control whether or not the Grizzly Lake fire has already burned over one of the state's most famous getaway spots. The news from the Postal Service suggests that Colorado is better positioned to hold an election by mail than just about every other state. Denver City Council will consider a plan to disarm police and replace them with unarmed peacekeepers. And an artist who found a claim in Colorado talks to us about his original life plan, going to space. That and your good news every Friday on Next. Colorado's current wildfire situation really reminds me of where we were with COVID-19 in early April. We had some known hotspots. There was clear danger of things getting out of hand. The conditions were ripe for catastrophe. Now, Colorado did a pretty admirable job of controlling the spread of the pandemic, better than most states. Let's hope that we are at least as fortunate at controlling the controllables, as they say, to ensure that as little of our state burns as possible. Because just like with the pandemic, reckless behavior, defying a burn ban or tossing a cigarette can have consequences that spread far beyond the person who made the stupid decision. The newest large fire in our very dry state is the Williams Fork fire, started in Grand County this afternoon. It's in the southern Williams Fork Valley, and it is moving toward the Church Park area. Few campgrounds have evacuated. Air support's working that fire. The Cameron Peak fire, 60 miles west of Fort Collins. It's 2 days old, and firefighters are just getting a handle on its size and its potential danger to more inhabited areas. It's thought to be as large as 6 square miles after doubling this morning. The Grizzly Creek fire in Glenwood Canyon still has I-70 shut down indefinitely. It is 21 square miles and still burning. CDOT is asking people who live on the Front Range not to go west up into the mountains this weekend because of the volume of smoke up there and other issues that are due directly to that fire. And the Pine Gulch fire north of Grand Junction in Mesa County is now the 4th largest recorded fire in state history. 109 square miles at this point. Containment is in the single digits. Now, obviously, all of those fires burning in very remote areas away from large population centers, but the concern is that either a new fire could start closer to an urban area or one of those fires could move quickly in that direction. Man, if there was ever a year that a beautiful spot like Hanging Lake would be scarred by fire, of course it would be 2020. We don't know exactly what's happened at Hanging Lake. A forest ranger says smoke from the Grizzly fire is too thick to fly overhead and see if Hanging Lake burned. Hiking in is not an option right now. We do have somewhat of an idea of what they're going to find there, though. A guy who knows how to analyze GIS data, Geographic Information System inputs, reached out to us after going through what the fire services have put out publicly. Daniel Molnar does not work for a fire agency. He's just a private citizen with this expertise. He's got a love for the outdoors.
Yes, it was tough to see that. And, as we've all driven past old burn areas in Colorado, if we've been in Colorado for long enough, and we see how the fire doesn't really miss spots in the middle. It's unfortunate. It's an iconic spot in Colorado. It's like if the Maroon Bells were to burn or something like that. It's heavily visited, and it would just be a terrible tragedy. And just one more thing to add on this year, I guess.
Daniel says, based on the information he's seen, he doesn't see how Hanging Lake was spared. He also looks at GIS data that comes in that maps how runoff is going to work after fires take out vegetation around the state. The data that he used for this, as well as that project, it's available to anybody who wants to look at it online. The United States Postal Service says that most voters in Colorado should have no issue with mail-in voting, as the USPS issued more dire warnings about voting delays in other states. What they're telling us here sounds a lot like what we have been telling you for years. Do not try and mail in a ballot within a week of Election Day. You got to go and drop it off at that point. A July 31st letter addressed to Colorado's Secretary of State comes from a Postal Service executive warning that Coloradans who register to vote or change their registration too close to the election might have trouble with the post office timelines. The Postal Service ranks Colorado as what they're calling a narrow warning. Almost every other state, 46 of them, got what was classified as a heightened warning. More potential for trouble there. Colorado's Democratic Secretary of State Jenna Griswold says she is not worried about mail-in voting here. She continues, she says, to monitor threats by President Trump to make it harder to expand vote by mail. The president has said in the past that more mail-in voting is bad for Republicans. And yesterday he said that he did not want to give the Postal Service enough funding to allow them to expand mail-in voting. Denver City Councilwoman Candy Cedabacca wants to get rid of the Denver Police Department and replace it with an unarmed peace force. Now, there is absolutely no indication the Denver City Council is going to go for that, but Cedabacca has secured a conversation on the subject. She's put it on the agenda for next Monday. Cedabacca's proposal would not defund the Denver Police Department. It would replace it with this peace force. The funding would just move over there. She worked around the normal committee process to get this on Monday's agenda. Cedabacca says the Denver Police Department is being reactive instead of proactive. She says this peace force would, quote, prevent conflict, reduce violence, and strengthen security, prioritizing a holistic, anti-racist, public health-oriented approach. Denver Mayor Michael Hancock is like, nah. He said, quote, City Council should reject it soundly, and the councilwoman should exercise greater transparency and public accountability, end quote. The two of them are very fond of each other. Stay tuned for this on Monday. Judge in Douglas County says that there is enough evidence to continue the child kidnapping prosecution of a QAnon follower who's accused of plotting an armed raid with fellow QAnon believers. QAnon is the unfounded conspiracy theory that President Trump is fighting a secret war against cannibalistic Democratic pedophiles who drink the blood of children. Cynthia Absug's case has made her a bit of a celebrity in America's QAnon conspiracy circle. Investigators accused her of planning an armed operation against the foster home where her son now lives after he was taken from her custody. The QAnon conspiracy theory lately has crawled out of the deep corners of the internet and into conservative politics. A QAnon follower is likely headed to Congress after winning a Republican primary in Georgia. And Lauren Boebert, the Republican candidate for Congress running to represent the Western Slope in southern Colorado, has also expressed support for QAnon. When 5 people were killed in a fire in Green Valley Ranch, we wanted to know why Denver police so quickly suspected arson. The fire was intentionally set. Investigators won't tell us about that, so we sought out a guy who has been inside arson investigations like this. Here's Mark Salinger.
There's nothing at this intersection or this empty parking lot to remind you of what happened here back in 1997 at the La Hacienda Motel in Thornton.
Right, we just moved out at 219 a few days ago, and the kids that was living right there, I guess they died.
5 people dead, an arson investigation launched, and 23 years later, a suspected crime with no resolution.
Arson fires are very difficult to solve. Probably, one of the most difficult crimes.
Steve Pischke remembers that January night well.
I was the lead investigator.
At the time, he worked for North Metro Fire. He'd spend a long time looking into who and what started the fire.
Many years.
But the challenges of solving an arson investigation would ultimately prove too great, even for a team of state and federal investigators from around the country.
You're pretty sure that you know that this wasn't accidental, but you just can't bring enough of that information together.
Across town, and more than 2 decades later, arson investigators are now working to figure out who started a fire that killed 5 people in Green Valley Ranch earlier this month.
The investigation is long.
Steve doesn't know what investigators have found.
The process in itself is very involved.
But he does know what they're looking for.
We try and determine an area of origin. Where did this fire begin?
And understands better than most just how difficult cases like these are to solve. And as for the latest into that investigation in Green Valley Ranch, Denver police are being very tight-lipped. They haven't said if they have a suspect or Kyle really released any new information.
All right. Mark, any parallels that we know of between the 97 investigation and the Green Valley Ranch investigation?
Yeah, well, Steve Pistry says that the National Fire Protection Association puts out a manual that gives fire investigators a kind of checklist to go through and how to investigate. Alcohol, tobacco, and firearms was also involved in that 97 investigation. They have representatives here as well for this new investigation.
Mark Salinger reporting. Thank you, Mark. I want to take a little bit more time tonight, not just to show you Colorado's encouraging COVID-19 trends, but to talk about whether we are overdue as a state for a conversation about lifting and loosening some restrictions. I think that Coloradans have earned that by sacrificing economically and socially to turn the tide, while people in some other states were just splashing about in the tide without a drop of social distancing. So look at Colorado's new cases. 319 new cases today, trending down again from our smaller peak that we saw in July. We're testing at a respectable, though not overwhelming level, so it's tough to make the argument that we are missing enormous amounts of undetected virus out there. The positivity rate is proof of that. If our testing was woefully inadequate, you would expect that the percentage of tests coming back positive would be well above 10%. We're under 3% today, have not been above 5% coming back positive since May. And to me, here's the most crucial indicator that says that Colorado should reconsider if we can loosen some restrictions, one by one, to see if the numbers hold. It's hospitalizations, all right? 170 people are in the hospital in Colorado with COVID-19 today. That about holds steady from yesterday, and that number has been on a steady decline for weeks now. We've been told all along by the health experts that hospitalizations is that key measure. Do Colorado's hospitals have the capacity to handle a surge? Yes, they do. So what are we going to do with the opportunity that our sacrifices and our safe choices in Colorado have afforded us right now? I'm not speaking only about the decision to reopen schools. That is a really complicated decision. It's a massive shift that's almost certainly going to move the numbers when it happens. But there are other less sweeping things that we could do to make life and the economy a bit more like normal. If Coloradans are willing to continue wearing masks and social distancing, the numbers suggest that the governor and the state's health experts should be having an open discussion with us about which restrictions can be relaxed, because we have a track record of responsibility in this state, and we have the capacity in the healthcare system to handle a blip of increased cases if we were to recalibrate our approach. Rejected by his country the first time around.
And what happened to this black astronaut guy? Well, the guy went away.
An almost astronaut turned artist finally gets the recognition he deserves. Next. I hope that you are wrapping up your work week feeling great, if nothing else because you were part of something special this week. $5 at a time, our weekly micro-giving group project that we call Word of Thanks. You raised more than $20,000 for newborns in need. That's amazing. In 2 days, that's what you came up with. This is the nonprofit effort to make sure that low-income families leaving Denver Health with their newborn have the essentials that they need for a healthy and safe start to their baby's life. The basics like diapers and wipes and clothes and things like that, but also if they need it, a crib or a car seat or a stroller. We knocked on this nonprofit's door out of nowhere and asked if next viewers might give them some unexpected help, and $20,000 is going to go a long way. You're welcome to add your $5 to the effort if you haven't already. It's a guaranteed way to feel great every Friday night. Just text word thanks to 303-871-1491. We'll shoot you the link.
Smoke, haze, and hot highs in the 90s. An air quality alert has been issued because of the extensive wildfire smoke. Temperatures today in the low 90s, triple-digit highs down south. A weak front that came in did push that smoke up against the Front Range foothills and trigger a couple of severe storms in extreme southeastern Colorado. And watching the smoke plumes on radar, the smoke's so thick and it will be a problem for us tonight and heading into the weekend. And so in Denver, smoke and haze, low 60s tonight under partly cloudy skies. Saturday's high will be back in the low 90s. A dry weekend coming up with perhaps a better chance of rain from thunderstorms and a slight cooling trend early next week.
Ed Dwight. If you know that name, it's likely for his prolific sculpting career here in Colorado. We featured his work on Next. And he was recently honored in Washington for the work of his younger years. Katie Eastman has the story.
In a warehouse in North Denver, an artist still works. At age 87, Ed Dwight creates to honor black heroes.
I think the world has settled on me being a sculptor.
He makes monuments dedicated to celebrating black musicians, activists, and soldiers around the country. He celebrates what was and what could have been. A man who knows what it's like when the world won't accept a black man.
Because this was 1961 that I got a letter inviting me to join the astronaut corps.
With President Kennedy as his sponsor, Ed Dwight became the first black astronaut candidate. But in 1963, the man behind his mission was killed, and racism took off instead.
A black or a woman joining this group would make it so offensive to the American public that they wouldn't pay taxes for NASA to be in space.
Even coming in 7th in a class of 17 test pilots wasn't enough, and the first black astronaut candidate never got the job. For decades, the nation forgot, until a New York Times reporter came calling.
And then what happened to this black astronaut guy? Oh, the guy went away and he disappeared into the ether. Where is he? And so she calls me up.
Last year, this 12-page article caught the attention of the people in charge of the space program today, the ones who have settled on a different world for black astronauts.
And I was told over and over again this was too early. It's too early for anybody black to be doing anything like this, you know.
It shouldn't have been too early, but now the Pentagon is acknowledging that.
I ended up being exonerated, if you will.
He became an honorary Space Force member last week. The sculptor is proud of this honor, but he didn't need it.
I've done so much since then to supplant that.
Ed Dwight will be remembered not for settling for what he never became, but for honoring the men and women who never settled. Katie Eastman, 9 News.
Wow, what a story. What a man. Okay, what is the good news in your life these days? Could you describe it for me in just 3 words? We asked Next viewers for a photo and 3 words for their good news. And I got to add a photo of my recent good news next. It's Friday, when your good news is our news. We asked you for nothing more than a photo and 3 words. Those are my girls. Quick word before we go. This week marks 13 years for me here at 9 News, and last week, Next celebrated 4 years on the air. Jobs like this are difficult to keep if you don't have viewers. I am still here because you are still here. And speaking for the whole Next team, the show is still here because you are still here. That's our good news. See you next time.